So interestingly, I was struggling a little bit with how to present this lecture, and I was trying to figure out why, and then I realized that I'm sort of in the throes of creative emptiness. So I'm actually in it while I'm presenting it, which makes it very interesting because I haven't reached the other side yet. So you'll sort of bear with me in that process because I'm in it. There were two quotes I saw that I just wanted to reference before we start. One is that we kill our aliveness with artificial fullness. And the other is emptiness is the doorway to our divinity. Right? So those two weren't written together, but they go together, right? And the essence of that is that we're very busy. We are very busy people. We keep ourselves busy. We take in a lot of noise. We create a lot of noise. And the lecture argues that that is in part by design to keep us distracted from this sense of emptiness, right? And so the busier we keep ourselves, the less access we have to this place of emptiness where if we can stay in it long enough with patience and courageous faith, we can actually create from that place. So creativity is born out of emptiness, our ability to be in the space of emptiness. So the lecture is really like, well, how do we get there? What does it take to get to a place of emptiness? And what do we even mean by emptiness? So that's what we're going to explore today. Okay, so this lecture talks about this idea of a new person and a new consciousness. And that new person is a person who is receptive to inner guidance, right? So we read a lot about like how to feel better. We do a lot to how to feel better, what to know, what to do. We look outside of ourselves to figure out what to do. The answer actually lies within, right? But we're so busy and we're very blocked through our thoughts and our physical body and our belief systems and our relationships and our society, that we aren't quiet enough to actually hear the guidance, right? So why is that? And sort of how do we work through that? So the guide talks about needing to become receptive, to be able to take in inner guidance, which even though it's unique to each of us, it's actually quite universal. Like there is a collective, universal, divine consciousness out there. Each of us needs to hear our own version of it, but it's a universal knowing, right? And so we must become receptive in order to hear this. I can't hear it. That's a great example. There you go. God just delivered, right? Okay, so the way we do this is to become receptive, and the way we become receptive is to become empty, right? And then the guide sort of starts to talk to us, well, how do we become empty? The first thing we have to do is recognize that our mind is very much involved in the process of becoming busy. Our mind keeps us very busy. And our mind keeps us busy because we tell ourselves, I have to be busy because if I'm not busy, then I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do. And if I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do, I'm not going to get the love I need. I'm not going to belong. I mean, wherever that train takes you, your mind is sort of guiding you towards that, right? Now, the mind, as the lecture says, is called a closed circuit, right? So think of it, there's your mind, okay? And it's influenced by your family, your personal experience, your society, maybe what you expose yourself to in terms of news, your culture. Your mind is pretty much influenced by your environment, right? And what that means is like you have a particular set of beliefs based on all of this stuff, right? So what's something that you can safely say you were conditioned to believe growing up? Anyone want to just throw something out there? Religion. And what was the belief?
Catholic.
Catholic.
Yeah.
And so that influenced your thinking about what, as an example?
Well, the concept of God.
Concept of God, right. So your mind has an image of God that fits within this closed circuit based on your upbringing. Anyone else?
Life is struggle.
Life is struggle. One more.
Life is unfair.
Life is unfair. Great. And here's where we live, right? In this closed circuit. Now, imagine, so this is your belief system. What do you imagine how this might influence your behavior? Right? So life is unfair. What's one way that influences how you act in the world?
I don't take risks.
You don't take risks, okay? Life is a struggle. How does that manifest? How do you act that out?
You need to work hard to get something.
Okay.
And completely, it closes your possibility to see that some things are just happening.
Uh-huh.
You just can receive things without doing something.
Uh-huh. Right. So you're constantly having to do, because it's a struggle. You're climbing, always climbing, right? And you won't take risks because what's the point, right? Because life is unfair, right? And for you, Michael, with God?
Yeah, I mean, you're guilt and shame.
Guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And that leads to either behavior or
Sure.
some
Yeah,
action or
yeah,
non-action.
yeah.
Right. So, okay, so already, right, what do you think creativity looks like in a closed circuit?
That's limited.
Limited. Because it's bound within sort of a finite set of beliefs, right? So the first step to becoming empty is to first look at the closed circuit of our mind. And the lecture uses the term puncturing the closed circuit of the mind, which I love too, right? The idea of like, right? Whoops, that's the end of the brown marker. I'm not going to get my hotel room key back. I am clearly not channeling anything at the moment. But you get the bit. You get the idea. Okay. Yes? Okay. So closed circuit, creativity is limited because our thinking is limited. Right? When we think of anything that's been created, we need a certain level of imagination. We need a certain level of disbelief of what we believe, right? We need to sort of have this, we envision something that's outside of the closed circuit. So the more tight we live in the circuit, the less able we are to really create. We could probably recreate something, like a remake of a movie, right? But how about actually a good new movie? Like so that's the difference, right? We can recreate in this place, but we can't really create. Okay, so that's one of the first obstacles to becoming empty. Okay. So let's say we work through our closed circuit, right? Let's say we kind of say, I'm going to challenge the idea that life is unfair. I'm going to pose the question, the possibility in my mind that life is actually fair, right? And if life is fair, then that means that I actually have a part to play in my life in creating. And I realize I don't want that part. I like when life was unfair because I can just be, woe is me, life is unfair, right? Now you're telling me life is fair. Well, that means I actually now have some responsibility in creation. And then we're like, well, wait a minute, I don't want that responsibility. So what we're coming into contact is what the Pathwork obviously refers to as the lower self. But I kind of like to think of it as a deep layer, and the lecture calls this, of intentionality. This is the part of us that's like, no thanks, right? I believe now it's possible because I've punctured the closed circuit of my mind. I believe now that I can create, and life is possible, and life can be easy, and life is fair, and God is not shaming or critical, that God is love. Okay. And now you're telling me that I have now a responsibility to create because I'm not bound by this belief system. Well, I don't want that responsibility. Why? It's hard. It's going to require me to give up things. I'm going to have to compromise. I'm going to have to move to another city, and that feels uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to do it, right? I don't want to give up something, or I don't want to go towards something. So we're starting to get to know our own negativity, what Alan was talking about, our own negative intention, which is saying no. No to creation. And this sort of experience of meeting this level of intentionality is actually quite difficult, and more difficult, I think, than puncturing the mind, because this is like an energetic holding. it's probably where our trauma lies, our wounding is. Because the part of us that's saying no is actually a protective place. It's saying, last time I did that, I got screwed. So I ain't going there again, right? So it's like, it's trauma. And so the idea that we could just will ourselves to do it is not, I mean, you could, but in essence, it's like, that's not what that needs, that energy needs. It needs to be heard and understood. Why are you saying no? What are you so afraid of? You know, what images are coming up when you think about taking responsibility for your life, for your creativity, for your creation, right? So another thing we might meet after we've kind of punctured the circuit is our will. Okay? Our will says, okay, I believe life is fair. I'll go there, and I want to create, but I want to create what I want to create, and it's going to look the way I want it to look, and it's going to happen when I want it to happen, and anything short of that is BS. I'm not doing it. Right? So there's this will place in us, I very much have, which says my way or the highway. Now in creativity, as you can imagine, if that is your vision, my way or no way, you're probably not going to create, because when you create, you fail a lot. And you suddenly come up with, you know, this is a very bad example, but I'm going to give it because it's on my mind. I used to work for a drug company, and they were testing a drug for hypertension. And men were coming back and saying, this is the worst story to tell here. And these men were reporting like they were getting sexually aroused. And suddenly this drug is now used for erectile dysfunction. And it's like, the idea was like, we're testing this for high blood pressure. And now it's on the market for testing something they had no idea of, right? So the point of that horrible, inappropriate story for this lecture is that sort of to be creative, we have to kind of surrender the idea that like it's going to look just like this, because in the end it might look nothing like that, right? So the surrendering of our, you know, need that it be our way and it look our way and it has to be our way is an essential piece of the work of creativity. So I am here right now, and I refuse to let this go. So that's when I said to you, I'm in the throes. This is hard, because it has meaning. It's like the lower self, again, isn't there to just make life difficult, even though it does. It's there because the alternative feels very frightening. So in my case, to give up my will feels like death, like actual death. So I'm not going to give that up. I don't know how to be in chaos. I don't know how to be in debt, right? So these things are here. They didn't just appear. They're there because they formed out of a place where we got hurt and we tried to protect ourselves. So we need to actually be quite gentle when we explore the lower self. It's, you know, I've heard someone in the community talk about it. It's traumatized energy. So another thing we might find is pride. Right? So let's say, you know, I want to create and I've had a different career and now I have to start over and have to start at the bottom. Well, I'd have to surrender some of my pride in order to start over. I'd have to humble myself. I'd have to be vulnerable, right? And I might not like that. So pride is another one. Fear is another one, right? Fear, it's not going to work out. Whatever the fear is, there's fear in pride and there's fear in will. But like our fear, like I don't believe it's going to be okay. I don't trust the world. I don't trust life. I don't trust, and I won't trust. Right? So all of these things, what do you think their impact is on creation? Stifling. Right. So after we've kind of worked through our limited beliefs within the closed circuit, we are going to come in touch with like a very deep place in us that's saying no to creation. So even though you guys are all out there and you're manifesting everything, you're doing all the things that your outer will wants you to do, you're going to the job interviews, you're going on dates, you're doing everything, your outside world looks like, I really want this, but it's not happening. Why isn't it happening? Well, most likely it's because there's an inner world in there that's saying no. Mm-mm. And until we sort of come to know and work through and transform that inner no, whatever we do on the outside it's just wasting time. You might as well just go to sleep and watch a movie. Probably better off, actually, right? I mean, not to negate outer will, it's great to put the effort in, But if it's incongruent with the inner resistance, it's not going to move, right? So one other piece in the lecture that I love, and Ellen, you quoted this the other day, is along with the will, there's a line in the lecture that says, basically, am I willing to be in life if what I want, I don't get? And that can include things like death, because I might want everyone to live forever, and they aren't. And it's like, if that's true, and I have to accept that, am I willing to be in life fully in the face of death? I'm not sure. I haven't figured that out yet. So everyone has their, I don't want to say everyone has. Check in with yourself to see if you have that place that says, if it doesn't look the way I want it to look, if life doesn't give me what I think I want or feel I want, am I willing to still show up in life? And that's part of the creative process too, right? And so as we meet all these questions, we're slowly moving into, what the guide talks about as emptiness. And it's also been referred to as the void. Now, emptiness is not nothingness. It's actually quite the opposite. It's like everything's happening in emptiness. And probably nothing's happening. Like that quote says, it's like we're pretty much, what was it? I don't remember the quote. Our aliveness, we kill our aliveness with our artificial fullness. And so one of the irony, the beauty of it is that in the emptiness is where everything's happening. Because we've gotten out of our own way, right? If we've done the work, we're no longer living in a closed circuit of our thinking in distorted thoughts. And if we've done our work, we've removed or we're working to transform the barriers that stop us from saying yes, right? So this is where everything is actually really possible. This is like start date to creating, And the thing about this, because I'm also here, is at first it's terrifying. It's terrifying. One, because we're not conditioned to sit in emptiness. I used to have a grandma that says, "What are you sitting there for? What are you sitting there for?" I got very anxious. You can't sit. You shouldn't sit. You're supposed to be doing something, right? So the first thing that'll happen in a place of emptiness is fear. Fear that you're wasting time. Fear that you're lazy. Fear that nothing's happening, right? That's the first. Fear that there's nothing on the other side of this, so I better do something. Right? So there's fear of disappointment, fear. Again, the second thing the lecture says that will come up in our state of emptiness is actually the fear of the aliveness that we're starting to feel in the place of emptiness. Yeah. Why? Because again, it goes back to this idea of obligation and responsibility. Because when we start to feel our aliveness, we're like, oh, wait a minute, I can create. Do I want to? Not really.
It says we shut the lid. Right?
We shut the lid.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just the fear that it's not going to work out. It's the fear that it actually is going to work out. And I'm going to have to do something about that and show up fully and risk my feelings and risk failure and risk all that stuff, right? So it's both fear of nothing on the other side and also fear of sort of our aliveness. I mean, I think the guide says we fear pleasure far more than we fear pain. Pain, it's like we know it's uncomfortable, but there's pleasure. It's like the rug could get ripped out from under us. There's lots of, it's alive. Our body doesn't know how to hold it. I mean, we can hold pain sort of, but pleasure is, right? So there's a lot to be said about do I fear my own aliveness? And in what way does that keep me from this place of emptiness? So in this place of perceived emptiness, we have to build the muscle of patience and faith. Those are muscles that have atrophied on my body. Right? Patience and faith. And what I love that the lecture says is it's not passivity, it's active passivity. Passivity is you do it. I'm just waiting for God to deliver. I'll just sit here and wait. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that you have to actively be receptive. You have to actively be passive. You have to actively make sure you keep emptying your mind. You have to actively make sure that your channel is open. That doesn't happen by just stepping aside. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it's like, the guy talks about like we need to shift our mind from the masculine to the feminine. Meaning we have to shift our mind from the active to the receptive. So, the process of being in the emptiness is called passive receptivity. I can't spell, whatever. You get it. It's not just sitting and waiting. It's stepping aside and doing your part. So in this place, however long it takes, I don't know how long it takes. I'm hoping that it ends soon. The guide says that like if we can stay in that place long enough, we're going to start to hear things that in this place we cannot hear. We're going to hear guidance. We're going to hear wisdom. We're going to hear instruction. We're going to hear love. We're going to hear and it could be subtle and it could be loud, right? And we have to practice hearing it, So this is a great time if you're in this space of the emptiness to not be so busy. This is probably a great time to rest, to be quiet, maybe to be not separate, but, just detached from the noise so that we can actually hear. Now, the thing is, and Alan talked about like somatic work, and the guy talks about it briefly, but the only way to really be able to tolerate on some level this is for your physical body to be able to hold the charge of the discomfort. Because this is a very uncomfortable place. We're not used to it. We're used to being busy, and we're used to fighting our own selves, and that's we're busy there. This is like holding on to the terror, the fear, the despair, the sadness, the pleasure. Like this is where the somatic work comes in. Because in this work, it's about really building the physical container to hold those emotions. Because in some ways our mind protects us from all those emotions because we think those emotions are going to destroy us because they probably did at one point or harmed us in some way. So it's like this is not just, this is a fairly conceptual and intellectual exercise. This is a more emotional and energetic exercise of meeting the lower self and meeting our resistance. This is about building a muscle of tolerability, I think. So this is like an energetic, spiritual, conceptual, physical space of just, there's some mornings I wake up in this place and I'm just like, I cannot do it. I want to go back so badly. But once you've done the work, you actually can't. Like you actually can't. You're like, that door is locked. It's closed. I couldn't even fake it if I tried, So it's just like, okay, can I hold, let me hold on while this sort of few moments of terror passes. Yeah.
So, I'm trying to understand how to juggle all the things that I have created for myself to do, and they all feel like I have to do these things. And there are some things that really are survival based, and then there are other things that are, this is my mission in life kind of things, which is part of what I understand the Pathwork guide talking about, that we fulfill our soul's purpose. So I've identified some certain actions that I can take that are tangible to achieve this purpose. So I'm wondering, because I completely resonate with the importance of being empty in order to receive. But I'm not sure how, I was giving an analogy earlier about we're on the 12th floor here. So at some point, the action has to happen, like the actual doing of the thing to build the first floor,
Yeah.
second floor, up to the 12th floor, and now the building is built. But at what point, how does the creative emptiness, does it come before the concentrated effort?
So my interpretation of, no, don't do that. Sorry. My interpretation of of this would be ideally in the aspect of creating, this comes first, right? It's like you want to have the vision to build the building, right? And you want to have, what is the idea of that building? What's its purpose? Like, what's my intention in building it? Am I building it because it's the tallest building in the city and I'm going to be the richest person and the most, that's one intention. Or am I building this building because in this building we'll house people that come in and do work and create and sort of give to other people, and and that's not a value judgment per se, but I think intentionality matters. So we can create from the ego and from the outer will. We do lots of stuff. I mean, our whole country is built not built, but at this point is in large measure due to sort of the ego mind, right? The outer world. Let's build bigger buildings, right? But imagine if we just like slowed down, went through this process, what would we create as citizens? And that's what the lecture starts with. It says we're in a new era, a new consciousness, a new person, where what we build will be based on this idea of like our higher self is creating it. We're no longer wanting to build from that place of the ego mind. We're wanting to build from a deeper place of knowing. That's the ideal world that the lecture is pushing us towards. To be in that state of creation from a higher purpose, a higher sense of self, a higher consciousness. So does that
It
answer?
sounds like, so you're saying like the creative emptiness is the blueprint for whether it's a spiritual path or a tangible thing.
Both, yeah, both. What a cool world it would be to create everything we're creating in the world from whatever we discover in this empty place. Because think of what our intentions are in the closed circuit. In the closed circuit, it's like, I need money, I need love, I need. It's from this clingy young place that thinks I can only get it this way or that way. It's a desperate place and we're racing against each other and we're separate, right? That's what happens when we create in this place. So imagine what we could create from this place.
It's like the external, the external forces are what have fed us for the longest time.
Yes.
Now it's asking us to come from the inner
Yes.
place. That's so individuated for each one of us.
Yes.
Right? But you said there's the universality for all of us.
Yes, yes. Which I'd imagine that universality is like love, like awakening, enlightenment, sort of consciousness, humanity, right? But how each of us contribute to that is individualized. And so we receive a unique message, but it's for the collective. That's how I interpret it.
Well, the externality is to me what in terms of where I am in my life and feeling this disconnect from who I am, myself. And this is comforting when I was reading the lecture about like, wow, there's somebody I can get to know, there's something really wonderful there.
Yeah.
And all the external stuff hasn't been really working. Not that there's not good in externality, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the externality is good so long as it's, again, in alignment with the inner. And that's the biggest takeaway for me because I work with clients and a lot of them are like, I'm doing everything I can to make this happen and it's not happening, right? And then you try to sort of start here with them and there's lots of stuff that's completely distorted. And then you go here and there's like, oh no, it has to be my way. It's like, okay, oh no, I'm not going to be vulnerable. I want a relationship. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm like, okay, well that's going to be a fun relationship. It's like, it's like, well, I don't want to be responsible for it. I just want someone to give it to me. It's like, oh, well, no wonder things aren't working out for you, right? Oh, and I'm not going to wait for it. I can't wait. That's wasting time. Because my grandma told me you can't wait. And it's like, the guide calls this a vicious circle. It's like, it's nauseating until, and then you just get off the ride because you can't take it anymore. And so I think the guide tells us, like, we don't have to wait for crisis. Like, we can choose. We can choose this path. And it's a good choice. So again, it's like to be receptive to this inner guidance, which will instruct us of what to do and which will align, our inner and outer wills, is to become empty. And we become empty by doing the work to unearth our distortions and our limited thinking that are influenced by our world, our little world, our big world, by meeting our no, like the inner no that's like, no. You know, by building our container to hold the feelings that are going to come from not living in the safety, because there's safety in this, and there's safety in this. So we are putting ourselves in a dangerous position, right? When we move here. We're actually safer than we are here and here, but from our conditioned sort of comfort world, we're in big danger here. That's why it's so frightening. But if we can trust that we are safer here than we are in these distortions, we can hold on. You know, and we need support, right? We are interdependent. We need, in this space of emptiness, we need to hang on to other people and get support and be reminded, yes, things are happening. Things are happening. So there's a lot more to the lecture, but this is sort of I wanted to simplify it in such a way that kind of made it somewhat practical. Hopefully this resonates with you. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The only other piece I would put somewhere, I'm not sure where, is the guy talks about the need to shift balance of the activating and the receptive principles, so the masculine and feminine principles, right? So if you're out there and you're doing, you most likely need to shift the balance to do less. And if you're out there and you're not doing anything and you're sort of waiting, or you're dependent, or you're, you know, depending on other people to do things for you instead of you might need to activate, right? So you need to be aware of where your energy is out of balance. You know, if I'm doing too much, I need to rest, whatever rest means. If I'm not doing enough, I need to do something.
Yeah, I wrote on Poor Boston after I read the lecture, just before I came in, that it was it's receiving, it's been allowing the receptive part of me to, that's really just changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
And
what kept you from, I mean, what initiated the doing part of you?
well, so when you asked about the closed circuit, an image I definitely had growing up was about achievement.
Mm-hmm.
So my worthiness comes from achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of God image and various things, but I think that really, you know, the doing is so associated with my self-worth. So surrendering the ego of having a plan for everything.
Yes.
Needing to be in control.
Yeah.
Surrendering that is, and it's an everyday process, but that's where everything is opened up.
Yeah.
And also that's where pleasure has come in.
Mm-hmm.
So what you were saying earlier about pleasure and pain, and the fear of pleasure, and when you're in that receptive mode, you're not. Every moment is a possibility, which is terrifying,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not controlling.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening.
Right.
But that's where that's where the aliveness of,
Right.
of possibility comes in.
Right. So for you,
Right.
it sounds like in that emptiness place, like really being with the fear, so that it doesn't
Yes.
overcome you. That where it takes you right back to, it's like where it's safe, right?
Yes.
And to nurture that place. That's why in the emptiness place, it's passive receptivity. It's active receptivity. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Why didn't anyone
Yeah.
correct me? The teacher doesn't always know. Active receptivity, right? It's like, you know, while you're waiting for things to manifest, or sort of being patient, like you have to be with the fear, or be with the mistrust, or be with the sort of like charge in your body that's saying, I can't hold this. Like there's a role for us to play in the space of emptiness.
And if I may, just one other point.
Yeah.
I think I said this last lecture, but I always come back to the brilliance of the emphasis on the lower self, and how this does not work unless you're dealing with your deep know.
Mm-hmm.
And something that sort of clicked with me is about, because I'm so drawn to the inner world,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and this has allowed me to go so much deeper into my inner world. But part of our inner world is our inner know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never, you know, it's
Yeah.
not meditating on the mountain. That can be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But until we're dealing with that inner resistance,
Yes.
like, you know, we can't get to the
Yes.
emptiness. Not really.
Yeah. And in some ways, like the meat of the meat of the work is in the lower self, because it's like, you know, again, for me, it's like on some level I've punctured the circuit, right? But again, I'm tortured in this willful place. Like it's between me and, actually, I take a step back. Oftentimes, the lower self may still be influenced by an image that we won't let go of. Because my will is in part, and this is the lecture we did last time, my will is so strong because I have a certain God image. And that God image is sort of this aloof, punitive character. Why in God's name, excuse the pun, would I ever surrender my will to that? Right? So it's like there's this kind of almost like back and forth between like, okay, my will, I don't want to surrender it. Well, why? Well, I have a limited belief that God is this punitive, and if I surrender my will, there'll be nothing. Right? So it's kind of a back and forth between our belief system and sort of that energetic, no, I won't do it, I won't do it. And the energetic piece is really about tolerating the fear that comes with surrendering the will. Right? And then the intellectual piece is the image I have about the God image. Like, I'm not surrendering to that. And I also I don't know how to physically, energetically tolerate the terror of letting it go. So I'm kind of working at both of them at the same time. Does that make sense? But this, to me, my experience in this work, this is like the mothership. And mother might be a good word. This is like, this is where the rubber meets the road. Like, am I willing? You know, can't get to emptiness if we're not willing. So, yeah. Any other questions, comments? Anyone feel like they're somewhere in the creative process and they kind of can feel where they're at? Yeah.
Going back and forth with this, knowing about that, the field of infinite possibilities, which is where the juice and creative stuff is. And having a fear or a lack of trust.
Yeah.
Because I've been in this place for so long, tapping into that quite often, but not, it's like I keep putting my foot in and coming out because of that lack of trust.
Yeah.
So I think at this point, this is the lack of trust. It is a fear.
Yeah.
And a lack of trust that when I finally get the courage enough to go into that with my creative work, it's so huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the light, and again, it goes back to like the light can scare us more than the dark.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the dark's familiar, but at least we know it, right?
It's a lot easier to spend an hour on your creative work, or a couple hours or whatever, rather than, that realm of infinite possibility could be, that's going into my room and working for 20 hours a day. And it takes a toll on relationships and family and everything.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes it goes back, like I don't really.
It's a balance.
It's a balance.
act.
Yeah, it's finding the
And that's
balance.
the part that I think, because it also in that field, it has unlimited potential for your relationships, for everything. But it's that balance, it's the work,
finding
and
the-
responsibility,
yeah.
and balance and all that I think is, kind of keeps me back.
Yeah. Yeah. So there might be something for you to work in this space around that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can I ask a question? Because for some reason, when I think creative process in my mind, I associate that with creativity or creation. But for whatever reason, it wasn't until I thought of manifesting that felt more true for me. And then the emptiness is maybe more about, just allowing. Or just like openness to possibility.
Yep. Yeah. The great thing about the lectures is like if you got up, you'd present you'd present this in your own language, whatever, like, however the lecture is called to you. Like, those are great words, right? It's manifesting, it's sort of, you know, it's allowing, right? And in this lecture, it's about creating and it's about receiving and being empty. And so language is, however you interpret this lecture, is great. It's great. Whatever words resonate with you are great. It's the only way you'll use it as part of your path, is if it resonates in your own language, you know?
I'm curious, because you talk about, you know, sticking in the lower self, the part of you that's saying no. And then we have this place where we get to the emptiness, where we're starting to be able to hear something come through. And then we have our higher self. What role does the higher self play in that kind of
It's interesting, there's no mention of the higher self. I mean, there's no really mention of the lower self in this lecture either, that language per se. I mean, the language they use here is more kind of receiving God, our God self, like our divine consciousness, which I think is an element of the higher self, right? So the language isn't used in this particular lecture, but my sense is you know, the divine consciousness is the higher self. How's everyone doing? What? It's a little hot. It's the heat of the emptiness. Yes. Anyone else? I've read this lecture like a lot of times, and I've read it at different stages of my work, and in different, every time I read it, I'm in a different place. And so, you know, it's like the negative intention really called to me this time around, and the fear of the emptiness and the surrendering of the will really called to me. When I first read the lecture, I was really engaged in the closed circuit because I was so filled with, like, I had a million things in this circle, you know? So wherever you are in your own process is exactly where you are. You might be over here going like, I don't know what I want. So, you know, you might be just sort of at the beginnings of creativity, or you might be in the process of creation, or you may have just created something.
What's striking me right now is how far I have to go in relationship.
Mm-hmm. In relationship.
In relationship with people in my life.
Uh-huh.
You know, like I feel, yeah, I can feel the place where I don't allow, I'm trying, but I don't allow for the emptiness. I'm not to that stage yet in relationship.
Yeah.
As much as I would like to be.
Yeah, makes sense. And I'm glad you say that because, again, this lecture could be not misinterpreted. This lecture could be interpreted to just mean the creation of like something like, I want to make a pen, I want to have a job, right? This is like creation of like our consciousness, our existence, every area, whether we can touch it or feel it or think it, it's all part of creativity. A new thought is creativity, you know, a new feeling is creativity.
And aliveness in relationship.
And aliveness in relationship, right, is creativity.
Do exactly.
Right.
Do that. You also have to go through this.
Yes. I think to do everything, you have to go through this process. And that's what Alan was saying, like every lecture, sometimes I'm like, should I present a lecture? Because it's pretty much the same lecture I gave last time. And it's pretty much, and the good news is I find that comforting. That like every lecture is basically telling you kind of the same protocol. It's just it's talking about God in one, it's talking about creativity in another, it's talking about relationship in another, it's talking about responsibility, but it's the same process. We have to sort of puncture the circuit of our mind, we have to meet our no, our inner no, we have to tolerate the feelings that come with it, and we have to sort of surrender over something, to something, you know, and that's it, that's the path. Yeah.
I mean, this is all fantastic, and I love the map that you've drawn here. And as far as with the pride, the fear, the will, the only issue I'm having is that I'm looking at that as more of a positive in terms of, you know, that's that's the road to get to where we gotta go, rather than using a negative term.
So can you say more what you mean by
Well, it's been referred to as, 2 or 3 times you said negative
Yep.
in relation to this.
Yep.
I'm looking at it more like a positive map to get to, because we kind of have to go through a lot of that.
Yeah. So you're saying these 3 things are positive?
Well, it's positive in the fact that that's the road that you have to go through to get to that field
Uh-huh.
of infinite
Yeah, yeah.
possibilities.
Yeah.
And I don't think the field of infinite possibilities understands even that concept of negative.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think that comes up with the keys, the idea of not rejecting the negative, but transforming it, right, accepting it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the
But it is language.
the guy talks about, like, will is great so long as it's flexible. And, pride is great so long as, there's vulnerability and love. And fear is okay so long as, there's courage and trust, right? No one's saying that, we can't, these are important qualities on some level, right? But it's the sort of the energetic tone of them, right? If I'm willful and it has to be my way, I'm not very flexible, right? And if I'm proud and I feel like, there's a positive, there's a healthy element to pride. But if it blocks vulnerability, that affects our ability to be in connection and
Yeah,
create.
that's pretty much what I was
Yeah,
trying to-
absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. That's right, yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Marion. This lecture has so much, and I really appreciate it, and the integration with the energy. Because what I've learned from having been the example of the person that tries to figure everything out, got very stressed from it for many decades, and knew from the concepts in the path, to challenge that, but it took a lot of noticing, a lot of inner work and releasing
Yeah.
it all, and knowing that it was like a lot of my life task
Uh-huh.
about this letting go and allowing.
Yes.
And so the guy mentions in here, if you're going to be a pianist, that's great, you got that creative, bent, but you got to do those finger exercises if
Yes.
you do that.
Yes.
And so I was always aware that that in integrating the core work with these concepts, that if I really intend to create by allowing, then my vibration needs to match what it is
Yes.
that I am intending to create.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, so in practicing that more, brings up the blocks to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I distinguish sometimes terror and fear, and that terror, that inner child self before I created my defense, that terrifying fear of annihilation, distinguish from regular fear of doing some new things, which is normal.
Yep.
And in being able to make those distinctions, it really has come from experiencing it in my body
Mm-hmm.
and in my energy structure. And so I had the guidance to really raise my vibration. And since I'm working on writing a book and doing some illustrations, things I've never made money for, that I've never earned income from. And I feel pressure to earn more income. So there's that pressure of like,
Yeah.
gotta get more money, that gotta, that energy to allowing, I have something to say and give.
Yes.
So in the contrast of those energies is I've been able to then do a little bit of that acting as if.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some theater background and all that, so I find it delightful because I have on the street where I live, Upper West Side, 50 years ago, I was instrumental in getting these trees planted on this street, which are now these huge,
Oh,
huge
great.
trees. And so I thought, I think I'll write about those. There's hardly anybody in my building that knows about those trees. So when I come out every morning, I really appreciate them and seeing them. So what I decided to do, because I felt some fear about writing this and being concerned about one of my major fears that stops me is taking on others' views of me. I did that as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So I was high intuitive in a family that all had their sleep masks on. So there was that like trying to fit into them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's still there, and the guy teaches that, those patterns still there, work with them, use them,
Mm-hmm.
instead of believing them. So, so I thought, okay, I want to write this piece about these trees, and I'm finding this fear coming up like, will anybody really like it, is anybody going to care, that kind of stuff, in my building. And so to just take on my love of these trees. So when I come out every day, I do a rave. I love you, I touch your heart, you're beautiful, you're my favorite tree, you're my favorite tree. And it sounds like a little wacko, but it is true. What I'm touching on is a truth that I've kept tempered.
Right.
Because of that, how will others view me? And I can feel that little touch of pain about
Yeah.
what will others think of me? So I do it, and I do it, less do I care, you know, York, if anybody sees me raving on about the trees or not. And as it is, I'm part of the Upper West Side Love Your Tree Brigade. I carry my latex gloves with me, and there's cigarette butts, whatever's in there. I do it from love.
Yes.
And in cleaning out the tree pits so these trees really feel that
Yeah.
energy. So from that has come what I think what the guide also teaches is, in what you're saying, that the opposition serves. And when I'm expanding, I see what's keeping me back.
Yeah.
And it serves me to pick even more, go into that void of the creative emptiness
Yes.
and allowing it, and it has so much energy. So it really is very graphic for me because of changing my energy.
Yeah.
Changing my energy rather than waiting for the energy to change when I get what I want. 'Cause
Yep.
it doesn't work. It's backwards.
Yes.
It doesn't work.
Great.
It
Yeah.
does not work.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm very grateful for that and the grounding in those concepts.
Yes. Concepts are like literally life altering. Yeah. Thank you. And I think the point I want to make about what you just said also is that like the energy frequency, you know, in a place like in a closed circuit is either kind of close to a flat line or like a pretty low frequency. And the energy that can come out of the emptiness, I mean, as you go through, we've talked about this before, as you go through this process, the vibration increases, right? And in that place of emptiness, it's quite high, right? I mean, you're freeing the energy. Energy is trapped in these places, right? And so as you go through this process, you're freeing energy, which creates a higher vibration. So creativity at a higher vibration is a lot different. Going back to the woman who's no longer sitting there, you know, about building the building. If you build the building from the closed circuit, the energy frequency of that building might be here. If you build the building from that place of creative emptiness, you know, and that building's going to be a very different building. Whatever that means, I don't know. But you know, so think of it. If you leave thinking of anything, just think of it in pure sort of energetic vibration and frequency, and how different you feel when you're in a higher vibration than when you're in a lower one. So, yeah. Are we good?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys.